Adam. Like
Hi.
I said, great to have you on. You did a
Thank
video on Apple Studio Display, and I was thinking that maybe you could just run us through why you bought it, why you love it, because I think inherent in that conversation, you're going to highlight a lot of stuff that I think I didn't really think of when I was looking at the Studio Display, and I think that's because I wasn't looking at why the Studio Display is useful. I was just looking at the spec sheets, and the spec sheets are kind of disappointing for the price.
Yeah, they are subjectively, you can kind of get the equivalent for a ton cheaper.
Yeah.
Now, I personally I've worked with many different types of displays for artists and stuff like that. And the thing that really drew me in was the experiences I had had with many other displays that were really good for certain types of visual production, like photography and stuff like that, or people who are involved in print.
Yep.
But my biggest gripe, and I work on like a $4,500 pen display right over here. I work with expensive displays and stuff like that all the time. Calibration has always been my rub. It's always been my really big fuss. And every 2 weeks I'm recalibrating because I'm doing fine tuning colors and fine tuned values and things like that, and details as well. And, I'd spend, a couple of weeks working on a painting, and then I go and I look at it on my phone and I go, that's not what I painted.
Mm-hmm.
The values are off. The colors have shifted, warmer, cooler. There's a lot more. Usually the contrast the blacks would be too black, and I'd lose a lot of the details in the lower values. So I'd end up having to kind of bluff it by going back into Photoshop or going back into a video production, a video app or whatever, and tweaking it, and then going back and forth and saving it and checking to see if I could get the color sort properly. And however, I loved the colors that I would get on my iPad, for instance, but I hated painting on an iPad. I'm not a big fan of doing artwork on the iPad, but I love the colors. And I always thought to myself, if I could get a display, an Apple display, where I get perfectly matched colors between my iPad, my iPhone, my desktop display and everything like that, or my MacBook or whatever, that would be the ideal situation. But of course, then the Pro Display came out. And I went, a display by Apple, and then the price tag came out, and I went, screw that. I flipped my desk and I walked out of the room, and I just got frustrated with that fact, and I went, okay, well, forget it. It's no way I'm going to spend that kind of money on it. And despite it being really pretty and blah, 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 I really didn't feel it was for, maybe like the high-end graphic design studios might be able to afford something like that, but it wasn't a consumer product in that regard. So when the studio displays came out, for the price that they did, and people would spit out their coffee when they'd see a price tag that's over $2,000 Canadian, right?
Yep.
I'm based in Canada, so I'm kind of thinking of Canadian prices, and a lot of people would spit their coffee out, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh, okay, now we're talking." A 5K display, 27 inches, which is the perfect size, especially if you want to use dual displays. 32 is something I always felt was too big for two displays. I would either go with an ultra wide. I prefer an ultra wide, or to go with two 27s. I think that really hits the sweet spot there. It's 5K, cool. That's a bonus. I'm perfectly fine with 4K, but it's the color representations, the contrast, the brightness, and being able to work on a painting on my studio display, and then take it and look at it on my phone and go, that's exactly what I painted, and have the confidence that when I'm posting my art on YouTube, that people are getting what I intended. Because you'd be surprised how many times I'd post a video on YouTube, and because I didn't double check it on somewhere else, I posted it and I went, I just published a public video where people can barely tell what I painted halfway through it because it was too dark. Because I do a lot of very dark Soulsian type of inspired art, and it was very frustrating for me. So since then, despite having a $4,500+ display here, not including the stand, for all of you people who freak out over the cost of the Pro Display prices or the Studio Display stand prices, I end up working on a cheaper desktop tablet just so I can take advantage of the Studio Display and paint on that. And I'd say the last 3-4 painting videos that I've done 80% of my painting process on my Studio Display, despite having this over here, which I prefer drawing on physically. So that in and of itself was, that has made it worth the purchase for me, because, one of the displays I tested out was that I love too, for what it's worth, is the BenQ, the SW321C.
Yeah.
And 32-inch 4K, big matte boxes and everything like that. Very impressive looking thing. And I can't paint on it. It's not good for digital paint. It's great for print, but it sucks for digital painting because my art is digital. What you see is what I see on my screen, right? I'm not handing you a print. I'm presenting you something on my screen. So I want to make sure I'm being faithful to that image, not the printed image. So for the BenQ, as beautiful as it is no good for digital painting. So this one I really feel is, when they called it the studio display, I felt as an artist, they're marketing this to me. This is a product for an artist. And well, I believe in that because I've been working on it since I got it, and I absolutely love working on this thing. It's a blessing.
This is what I mean, Lewis. Like all of this, you hear, he's like, this studio display, it fits into my workflow. And it makes sense for me because the thing that I heard you say that really resonated with me is you need consistency across your displays. You need them to look the same. And as a creator myself, that's important because you want the thing that people see to be the thing that you see on your screen when you're creating it, right? And that's the one thing that I never really considered. And you mentioned in your video that if you wanted to pair a second monitor with your iMac, for instance, like you couldn't really ever get them to match. And so it's not really useful. But with the studio display, every display looks exactly the same. And you know that when you create something on the studio display, it's going to look the same on an iPad. It's going to look the same on an iPhone and on a MacBook Pro. And so you know exactly what your consumer is going to see. And that is the selling point that I really didn't ever consider. Because I just considered the price and I looked at the specs and I'm like, it gets 1600 nits brightness, like that's cool, but 5K, it's the same as the iMac. It has the same PPI as the iMac. It looks like they literally just pulled the display out of the iMac and raised the price and made it a little bit bigger. And for me, that makes it not worth it. So I felt like I kind of got a raw deal because the value wasn't there. But then hearing you describe it, I'm like, this actually does make a lot of sense if you need consistency. And now
one monitor and dual monitors,
and if you want to do
triple monitors,
right?
You can't do that with an iMac in an elegant way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you don't have an equivalent Apple monitor to do that with. Yeah. That's to me one of the biggest deals. Next to the calibration is the fact that I can work with more than one screen, for sure.
Yeah, and to your point, there's a lot of great monitors out there, but most of them are 4K, for instance, and then your Mac has to scale the OS to 4K instead of just doubling the resolution to 5K, which is what it does with the 5K studio display monitor. So it really taxes your GPU, and I've heard people say it slows my system way down. So that's not great. And the OS isn't meant for 4K, so your text gets blurry and weird.
It does, yeah.
Right, which is also another thing. And then the brightness isn't there. So like a lot of monitors, like you said, like that really great BenQ monitor, it's meant for print. But a lot of print work, you have to have really low brightness. Am I right? Like 100 or 200 nits even, which is really low.
Yeah, like 200 nits max. And you want 200 nits max, and you want to make sure you're not getting this. You want your contrasts to be very, very, you want a nice flat contrast. You don't want your colors to be too embellished. Because if you ever take artwork, you produce artwork, and then you want to print it out, you can waste $50 worth of high quality paper trying to get the bloody print to look good because it comes out and the colors are completely off. So the whole getting, printing proofs and getting the colors to match, and then you do like a spreadsheet with all the different colors you got to work with, and you go, okay, I guess that one's the closest and that one's the closest. So when you have a print display like the BenQ, it's even got a print preview mode on it, which is really, really cool because then I really get a fairly faithful idea on what that print is going to look like because I'm probably selling them for what it's worth, if that's the type of business that I do. So I'm looking at it going, okay, I know it's going to print. I make a couple of tweaks. It comes out of the printer. It looks great when I don't have to reprint anything. And that printing paper is not cheap,
right?
Especially if you're doing like a big 13 by 19 print or something like that. So in that particular case, it's made for that. And a printer can never keep up with a digital image. It just can't. The contrast ratio, the brightness, the saturation, all that kind of stuff is definitely much stronger on a display for sure.